Hey there, welcome back. I'm coming to you today from one of our gorgeous lakes in Ontario, as you can see. Um, I, most days with this pandemic going on, I spend most of my day talking to clients. I usually try to see a couple at least a day. Um, Today was a particularly heavy day with a lot of hard stuff to hear about and to watch people go through. And it just reminds me of how lucky we are to have the things that we do. And I'm lucky enough to have these surroundings around me during this period. And I know that there's lots of people who don't get that opportunity. But I decided to come out here today because one of the things that I struggle with sometimes is trying to find that balance in self care. And I know I'm not out there as an essential worker working on the front lines. Oh, that's a duck taking off. I know I'm not out there on the front lines, as an essential worker, but I feel like I try to do my part by taking care of people who need to be taken care of, together but apart. Um, and so today I just wanted to talk a little bit about self care because this is one of the ways that I uh, get my self care in. And many of my clients have heard from me about this, but I've been having a much more difficult time because I recently hurt my knee. And hiking is my way of decompressing. And so, with my knee being all messed up, I've been having a really hard time with that. And it makes everything different and everything more challenging. So, um, today we're going to focus on what you can do to engage in self care. And I think this is mostly important for our frontline workers, the people who are really putting in the hours to help take care of us. So if you're a frontline worker, stay tuned because I'm hoping to give you some tidbits to help you take care of yourself. Welcome. As I said, we're going to be focusing on self-care today. Now, the big thing with the term self-care is that it's a really hot buzzword that we're hearing all over the internet, and especially in the mental health field. Now, the thing is that there's a lot of apps that are coming out and people that are talking about how to self-care. It always sounds like it's this fancy thing you do where you get in a bubble bath and maybe you have a glass of wine, or you get yourself a pedicure, you do something like this. And granted, all of those things can be self-care, but there's one major thing that all of these people that talk about what you need to do to engage in self-care, they miss out on a couple fundamental, really important pieces of what self-care is. And so we're going to try and break down some of these different things so that you can actually do self-care the right way. So stay tuned. Okay, so when it comes to self-care, there are some really important things to know. We're going to focus on a couple of them, and we're going to use a model that a friend of mine, Freeman, came up with. And I'm going to, in the description below, I'm going to put a link to his book that talks about this very concept that he taught me when we used to work together. So the concept is called SPEMS, S-P-E-M-S. And you'll notice that that is 5 letters. And so I want you to think of your self-care as having 5 separate gas tanks. That's the first piece of this. The second part is that your gas tanks are always going to be hard to keep full. There's always in our lives, we always kind of feel like we're juggling balls in the air, and we might be able to keep 4 of them in the air, but one always seems really, really tough to keep up. So I want you to think of your gas tanks in a similar way, that it's important to kind of have them all full at the same time and not just have a couple of them that we're doing really, really well and not paying attention to the others. So that's the first part. The second part is that there's balance involved in that. That means because there's those 5 gas tanks, you're constantly trying to engage in this balancing act to try and keep those levels full of each of those gas tanks. The third part is that the things that you put in those gas tanks for self-care are going to be individual to each person. So the things that make you tick are not going to be the same things that make me tick. And that's totally fine. And that's what's so great about self-care, is that you get to pick exactly what's going to fill your gas tanks. So here's the big thing though. How exactly do we fill those gas tanks? The biggest part of self-care that it's the biggest piece that everybody seems to miss, is that it's rooted in intention. So if you're not intentional about what you're doing and why you're doing it, it's not going to be self-care. It's just going to be more obligation. And we have so many obligations in our life already that obligations actually what drains us rather than filling up our tanks. So let's break down what SPEMS actually stands for. So the letter S, our first S, stands for social. This includes reaching out to people who we have close, deep connections with, and also having a certain amount of superficial or surface level connections. Sometimes we feel like we need a certain kind of connection. Sometimes we feel like we want to disconnect completely. And depending on how you would rate your social connections at any given time, you can determine, whether or not you need to get more or a deeper connection, or if you need to cut yourself off from people for a period of time. And that's going to determine how full you think that gas tank is. Your second gas tank is the P, is physical. So your physical tank really looks at your sleeping, your eating, your exercise, as well as relaxation. And when I mean relaxation techniques, not, vegging out and binge watching Netflix. Your physical is really it can also focus sometimes on sexual activity and whether or not we've had that in a certain period of time. So your physical is going to really look at like how much sleep you're getting, whether or not you're getting any exercise, whether you've overdone it recently, whether you've gotten enough sleep recently or not enough, or how all of those things kind of come to pass. So when we talk about relaxation exercises, we're often talking about things like deep breathing exercises, or going to see a massage therapist, or doing something that helps you to induce relaxation in some sort of way. Our E bucket or gas tank is what I refer to as the emotional gas tank. When we talk about the E, the emotional tank, we're thinking about how often we really check in with ourselves and get a sense of what types of things have been bothering us on a regular basis. We don't always necessarily notice how our awareness is tracking with how we're feeling on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes things happen and we don't acknowledge them or air them out. And so what we need to do is be able to check in with ourselves and say, oh, it was that thing that really bothered me, like, on Tuesday. And this is where sometimes the approach to how we deal with our emotions can sometimes be seeing a therapist, or writing in a journal, or it could be talking to a friend on the phone, because sometimes what we need to do is we need to be able to vent. There are a number of other ways that people all check in with their emotions, but these are just some examples. So the M stands for your mental bucket. Now, most people want to say that their mental bucket is going to be work or school, but it's contrary to this. Your mental gas tank actually refers to the way that you flex your mental muscle. So this is going to be the different types of puzzles that you might do. Maybe it's video games, maybe it's watching TV, maybe it's reading for pleasure, maybe it's playing an instrument or listening to music. It could be dance. There are a number of different ways that we kind of flex our mental muscle, and I like to think about it in terms of creativity more so than anything else, and that sometimes this is a way for us to be able to relax our brain in maybe in a different way than normal relaxation. So this is also where I put the Netflix binge in that category, and the caveat I always make with the Netflix binge is that it's really important that when you start a Netflix binge, and you're intentional about where it starts and where it ends, because we could just sit and watch forever. And again, if it's not intentional, it's not self-care. It's us just being lazy. So there's a difference between those things, and this is where the intention comes in. So the last bucket is your spiritual bucket. And this can be very difficult for a lot of people because we don't tend to necessarily really focus on what our spiritual side of ourself is unless we subscribe to a religion or faith. So what I try to tell people is that if this bucket feels difficult for you, or this gas tank feels difficult for you, is for you to focus more on the philosophical aspects of this gas tank. So what does that mean? It means that we try to elicit some sort of meaning based on why we're here and what it all means. So I try to kind of explore a few different areas. One might be how we feel connected to the greater community around us or the global community. We might want to focus on, obviously we might want to focus on religion or faith. We might also want to focus on maybe our connection to nature in some sort of way. We may also want to focus on something that feels bigger than ourselves. And for some people, it is also their life passion. Now, there's a few caveats I want to make with some of this. When we talk about your life's passion, for a lot of people, it's how we give back in some sort of way. Now, this is a bit of a double-edged sword when it comes to people who are in a helper role, like those working on the front lines. When you're a helper by nature, it tends to be that the things in our spiritual bucket are the things that deplete us and are also the things that fill us up. So we have to find a really good balance around that, and we also have to find other roles that, or other ways that we fill that gas tank that are not related to our helper role, in order to be able to sustain that spirituality piece. So it might take a little bit more exploration. I can give you kind of an example of some of the things people have told me in the past. A lot of people who don't subscribe to any kind of religion or faith like to think about things like what it sounds like when they're, say, in a screened-in porch and the rain is falling. Or sometimes people like to lie underneath the stars and see how big the universe is and how small we are. Some people like being outside and just being able to feel the grass between their toes. So people all have very different ways of kind of looking at these things. And it's really up to you to figure out which things speak to you on a spiritual level. There are just a couple points I want to add about the way that you check in and do your check-in to see how full your gas tanks are. I recommend for people to check in each of these gas tanks at least once a week. And so what you would do is you would kind of gauge for yourself how full you would say each one of these tanks are, and then pick something specific to do based on which gas tank is low. So say your physical gas tank was low. You may notice that, for example, you haven't been eating a lot of vegetables lately. Now, that seems pretty basic, that you want to eat more vegetables. That seems like a nice enough goal. But I want you to take that a step further. It has to be very intentional, otherwise it's not self-care, right? So you have to pick something that has a lot of intention behind it. So maybe you're going to decide that you're going to go to the grocery store and you're going to get some extra vegetables and you're going to cut them up on Sunday. And then you're going to make sure to put an extra snack in your lunch for the next 5 days. Now that is super intentional, and you know exactly why you're doing it. It might be that at the end of your week, you've decided you need to add some extra relaxation. So maybe it's scheduling a massage at the end of the week, or maybe you're going to have an opportunity to sit in a hot tub at the end of the week. Either way, what you're doing is you're picking something that is super intentional on purpose, and you're scheduling it similar to how you would schedule a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment, because your self-care is just as important. I'm going to post a couple examples here of what you could put under each of your gas tanks. Now, what I recommend is trying to come up with at least 5 things you could say that you would do under each of these things that usually are self-care activities for you. And this means that it has some sort of meaning to you and that it really makes you tick, but also it has to be very intentional when you actually decide to put it in your calendar. So there's one other point that I want to add to this, and that's that you're going to notice there's some crossover between categories. And this is all rooted in how you make sense of what types of activities you do for your self-care. For me, I know that art can be an emotional thing for me, can also be a mental thing. And depending on what's going on for me, it could also be spiritual. And if I did it with a friend, it would also be social. So this is the thing. You can also, depending on what your intention is and what you're trying to do with your self-care, sometimes you actually can power up and fill multiple gas tanks at once. But beware, they need to have the intention behind them, because if they don't, then it's not actually self-care and you're not doing anything except depleting your buckets rather than filling them up. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you like what you're seeing, please, by all means, shoot me an email. My email address is video@saraghhorsford.com, or you can find out more about me at my website, www.saraghhorsford.com. Also, please subscribe. And if you want to see something in particular, or you have a question on something, please write it in the comments below so that I have an idea of what you're looking for. And I'd be happy to try and do a video on that topic. So would love to hear from you. Until, next time, please continue to take care of yourself. And I wish you health and peace. Take care.